Global greetings to everyone and welcome to this special LinkedIn Live. I am Damodar Sahu, co-founder and Chief Growth Officer at Data Safeguard, a passionate advocate for responsible innovation in data privacy. Today, we are diving deep into a topic that touches every digital interaction we make. That is digital identity and consent. What is legal? What is ethical? A deep dive into consent management platforms, identity verification tools, and their regulatory implications. I am honored to be joined by a sharp legal mind, a public policy voice, and an emerging thought leader, Lagna Panda, named IBLJ's Future Legal Leader 2025 with expertise in competition law, privacy, cybersecurity, and digital policy. Welcome, Lagna.
Thank you so much, sir, for the very kind introduction and for having me here today. It is truly a great pleasure to be here to talk about something as important as digital identity, which forms the cornerstone of trust for businesses today, especially digital businesses. Now, as users of digital services, we are navigating a maze of consent screens, authentication processes, and of course, behind the scene data flows. Now, while it's important for businesses to understand and implement and meet the legal requirements of various new age laws, including various data protection laws that jurisdictions are coming up with, any company that is striving for good governance needs to go beyond what's lawful and also think about what is ethical and accordingly design their systems. So, over to you, Dr. Sahu.
Thank you, Lagna. Let's talk about the foundations of digital identity and consent. So, Lagna, let's begin with the basics. In your view, what constitutes a digital identity today, and how has the legal understanding evolved in India and globally?
Well, that's a great point from where we can start this conversation. To my mind, digital identity is more than just credentials. It is essentially a passport to the digital world, and it's sort of a mosaic where behavioral data, transactional data, biometric data, and various other types and categories of personal information come together. That's what culminates in a digital identity. Now there are some jurisdictions that have come up with tools. For example, we have Aadhaar in India, which allows for secure and accessible identification. Now, however, these tools also have certain vulnerabilities, and they do have there is potential for misuse. So the underpinning principle of data protection laws is that identity must be considered as power and it must be governed with care. So that's how I would share my thoughts about digital identity as a concept.
Absolutely, and that brings us to consent. Consent often reduced to a checkbox, but in privacy engineering, we say consent is not a moment, it's a process. How should business think beyond checkbox compliance? Lagna, I want to hear from you.
Right. No, I completely agree with you that it's not it's a process.
Yeah.
And consent is many things. Consent is about informed choice, consent is about purpose limitation, it's about data minimization, it's about revocability. And if we talk about true compliance in its ideal sense or true sense, it has to be the highest standard of governance that companies should aim for. Checkbox compliance can be a great starting point, uh, but in many cases, checkbox compliances can even fall short of the legal mandates of various data protection laws. And that can be because of how dynamic business processes can be, and cross-border sharing of data, and there are so many intricacies and nuances there. So compliance has to be contextual, And consent management mechanisms and systems that are put in place have to be meaningful.
Well said, well said. Now get into the consent management platform and little bit, tech tools, right? Let's go technical now. Based on my experience and working in data safeguard, I see many companies or organizations, even large organizations, rushing to adopt consent management platforms or CMPs or universal consent management platforms. But are they really solving the problem or just outsourcing it?
Right. I think we have to understand that consent management tools are a means to an end. They are not an end in themselves. So the goal is to comply with the mandate of a law. And the burden of compliance is with the data controllers, the data fiduciaries. It's not just about employing a tool. I mean, that is not enough.
Hmm.
So you have to make sure that your systems and processes that you've put in place, they work, and they work in a way that is compliant and meets the legal requirements that have been set out in laws. In fact, there was a recent decision in the US where, despite employing a consent management tool, an automaker was penalized for collecting excessive information and for putting in place a two-step opt-out system,
Yeah.
which was considered to be a dark pattern. So keeping this in mind, I mean, keeping this as the backdrop, one can say that consent management tools can be superficial in certain cases, and they don't really guarantee user autonomy. So it's important for organizations to evaluate and to ensure that before they deploy any tool, they assess it and they make sure that the tool that they're deploying has the capabilities that meets their needs and the mandate of any law.
Yeah.
So the capabilities can be integrating consent logs, recording consent granularity, and even having the capability of undertaking real-time auditing. So to conclude, all my thoughts here, I just want to say that ensuring privacy by design is ideal. That is the only way to ensure that your systems and processes on an ongoing basis remain compliant. And the ultimate goal has to be to minimize risks like dark patterns and coercive consent.
Spot on. And then it comes to identity verification like
Right.
biometrics, KYC, social logins. In your view, where is the ethical red line in identity tech?
Right. I think the answer is very easy, and this is the answer that you'll probably get from everyone, that verification, when it turns into surveillance, that becomes problematic. That is the ethical red line that organizations uh, must aim to not breach. And any tool that is employed, digital identity tool or consent management tool, it should not be over engineered in a manner so that its purpose goes beyond what it was meant to do.
Yeah.
So, tools like facial recognition or even cross-platform tracking, strict proportionality standards have to be employed to make sure that ethical standards and ethical principles are put in place and they serve only the purpose that they were meant to. And to make sure that this happens, organizations can definitely consider undertaking ethical audits in addition to legal audits that may be mandated under any law.
Super. Thank you. Let's get into a little bit on the regulatory landscape and
Right.
public policy. Let's decode the global legal fabric. What trends do you see in how India's, let's say, DPDPA or GDPR and US state laws are addressing identity and consent?
I think the first trend that I have noticed is that there is now a shift from notice to accountability. that giving notice is not sufficient. The burden of ensuring compliance has to be discharged. One cannot simply discharge that burden by putting up a privacy policy.
Mhm.
Second trend would be there are very specific data fiduciary frameworks that are being put in place, where responsibilities and obligations of data fiduciaries or data controllers under the GDPR are set out in categorical terms. This is in addition to providing certain statutory rights to data subjects or data principals. So that's the second part. And third, of course, the cross border tension, so to speak, because of the data flows that happen, which, of course, are across the border. They are not limited to any territory because the nature of businesses are such that we are working in a world where businesses are transnational. So, consent and identity protocols that are put in place by businesses can fail when data flow, goes from one region to the other, unless there are appropriate and uniform safeguards that are put in place. So, broadly, these are, to my mind, three trends that I see in the area of identity and consent.
Interesting. And from a public policy standpoint, how do we balance innovation and regulation, especially in India, where digital inclusion is still growing?
Right. Well, policies definitely have to be inclusive. Uh, on one hand, as a country, we have to empower the users,
Mhm.
but we also have to be mindful as to not to overwhelm them, because in that case, the whole point of providing them with a certain framework with certain rights may not really meet the goal for which it was enacted. Simplifying how consent is collected, or making notice accessible in multiple languages, which is what the DPDPA mandates, I think is a good step towards ensuring that policies are inclusive. Now, at the same time, laws and policies have to be structured in a manner to ensure that India's growth potential is not impacted severely, because we are at a stage where the startup ecosystem is booming,
Yeah.
and generally the economy is really taking off. Uh, Now, in the context of the Indian data protection law, the central government has the powers to exempt certain categories of companies or specific companies from certain obligations of the law. And I mean, we'll have to wait and watch how the central government exercises this power. But this power needs to be exercised in a very meaningful way to ensure that India's thriving economy continues to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah, yeah, sure. So let's talk about a little bit on the future outlook. So, what does the future of digital identity and consent look like to you, Lagna? And any guiding thoughts for tech leaders and policymakers?
Well, to just summarize, I think this is something we discussed initially in our conversation, that consent management has to be more meaningful, and it has to move away from being simply transactional in nature and has to be something transformational. Identity has to be user centric, where maybe we can see certain self governance, self sovereign models
Yeah.
come in place, which might gain traction. And I think lastly, when we talk about data protection or other new age laws, we cannot ignore technology anymore. Technology and law have to walk together, have to go hand in hand, in order to build systems that are compliant, that are ethical, and that are human centered. So that's how I think those are my concluding thoughts to be here.
Beautifully explained. To those watching, digital identity is not just about access, it's about dignity. Consent is not a formality, it's a fundamental right. So let's innovate with integrity And thank you, Lagna, for your wisdom and voice. And to our viewers, please follow Lagna Panda and Data Safeguard for more insights. And feel free to drop your questions or comments. We will try to respond you back. And stay safe, stay private. Thank you, Lagna. Appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.